I was standing in my kitchen when I realized I hadn't seen a property tax bill in 8 months. 8 months. And that's when everything I thought I knew about my family shattered into 1,000 pieces. My name is Carolyn Mitchell, and I'm 72 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in my living room in Laguna Beach, California, looking out at the same ocean view I've cherished for 40 years. Before we go any further, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. It helps me know I'm not alone in this, and honestly, after what I've been through, that connection means more than you might think. This story begins with something small, something so ordinary that most people wouldn't have noticed. But when you've been managing your own finances for 5 decades, when you've been writing property tax checks twice a year like clockwork since 1984, you notice when those bills stop coming. It was March 2023. I was organizing my filing cabinet, you know how we do, keeping everything neat and categorized, when I realized my usual January property tax statement never arrived. At first, I thought it was a postal service delay. We've all experienced those, especially in recent years. So I called the county assessor's office. "I'm calling about my property tax bill," I said to the clerk who answered. "I haven't received my statement for 2178 Pacific Coast Highway." There was a pause. The kind of pause that makes your stomach drop even before you understand why. "Ma'am, can you verify your name, please?" "Carolyn Mitchell. I've owned this property for 40 years. Another pause. I could hear typing on the other end. "Mrs. Mitchell, according to our records, the property at that address was transferred out of your name in July of last year. The current owner is listed as Jennifer Mitchell." The room started spinning. Jennifer Mitchell, my daughter-in-law. "That's impossible," I said, gripping the kitchen counter. "I never sold my house. I never signed anything." "Ma'am, our records show a grant deed was recorded on July 15th, 2022. It appears to be a family transfer. There was no sale price listed, so no transfer tax was assessed." I hung up the phone with shaking hands. This had to be a mistake. Some clerical error. Jennifer was married to my son David. She worked at Pacific Coast Title Company. She'd been handling estate planning documents for families for 15 years. She knew how important this house was to me. She'd sat at my kitchen table countless times, drinking coffee, talking about her day at work, showing me photos of my grandchildren. She wouldn't. She couldn't. But even as I told myself these things, even as I tried to rationalize what I just heard, something cold and dark was settling into my chest. Because deep down, in that place where we know truths we don't want to face, I understood that something terrible had happened. I grabbed my car keys with trembling hands and drove straight to the county recorder's office. I needed to see this document with my own eyes. What I discovered there would change everything. The county recorder's office was quiet that afternoon, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of paper. I approached the clerk with my driver's license and property address written on a slip of paper. "I need to see all recorded documents for this property," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at a table with copies of documents spread in front of me, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. There it was. A grant deed dated July 12, 2022, recorded July 15th. The document showed a transfer of my property from Carolyn Mitchell to Jennifer Ann Mitchell for love and affection, no monetary consideration. That's common in family transfers. What made my blood run cold was the signature at the bottom. It was supposed to be mine, but I never signed this document. I never even saw it before that moment. I stared at the signature. Someone had practiced my handwriting. They'd gotten the loops in the C almost right, the way my M slants slightly forward. But it wasn't mine. When you've been signing your own name for 72 years, you know every curve, every stroke. This was close, disturbingly close. But it was a forgery. The notary section showed it had been notarized by someone named Robert Caldwell. The notary stamp looked official, the seal embossed properly. but I had never met anyone named Robert Caldwell. I had never appeared before any notary to sign this deed. I took photos of everything with my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to take each picture 3 times to get it clear. Then I requested certified copies of all the documents. The clerk processed my request without any idea that she was documenting one of the worst betrayals of my life. Driving home, I kept trying to make it make sense. Jennifer had access to everything she needed. She worked at a title company. She knew exactly how property transfers worked. She had probably seen countless estate planning documents, deeds, signatures. She would know how to make a forgery look authentic. She would know which notary seals to copy, how to make the paperwork appear legitimate. But why? That's what kept circling through my mind. Why would she do this? David and Jennifer had been married for 12 years. They had 2 children, my grandchildren Emma and Lucas, ages 10 and 8. David worked as an architect. Jennifer had her job at the title company. They lived in a nice neighborhood in Irvine, about an hour north. They weren't wealthy, but they seemed comfortable. Had they been hiding financial problems? Was there something David hadn't told me? When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for 15 minutes before I could bring myself to go inside. My beach house, this beautiful weathered home with its blue shutters and white trim, the place where I'd raised David and his sister Michelle, where I'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where my late husband Thomas and I had planned to grow old together. Someone had stolen it from me. Someone I trusted. Someone who called me Mom. I needed to talk to David, but first I needed proof of everything. That evening, I spread every document I had across my dining room table. 40 years of paperwork. The original deed from 1984 when Thomas and I bought this house for $180,000. A fortune back then, but we'd saved for years. The refinancing documents from 1995. Thomas's death certificate from 2016, the deed that transferred the property into my name solely after he passed. And now this fraudulent grant deed that said I'd given it all away. I called my daughter Michelle first. She lived in Seattle, worked as a professor at the University of Washington. She and Jennifer had never been particularly close, not hostile, just different personalities, but Michelle knew how much this house meant to me. "Mom, slow down," Michelle said when I finally got the story out. "You're saying Jennifer forged your signature and transferred the house into her name?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. I have the document right here. I never signed it, Michelle. I never would have." "Have you talked to David?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. I wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't missing something obvious." "You're not crazy. If you didn't sign that deed, then someone forged your signature. And if Jennifer works at a title company, she would know exactly how to do it." Michelle's voice had gone hard. "Mom, you need to call the police. Tonight." "I will, but I need to talk to David first. He's my son. He deserves to know what his wife has done before I involve the authorities." "Does he, though? Mom, for all you know, he could be in on it." Those words hit me like a physical blow. David, my son. The little boy I'd taught to swim in the ocean right outside my window. The teenager who'd helped his father build the deck. The man who'd held my hand at Thomas's funeral and promised I'd never be alone. "No," I said firmly. "David wouldn't do this. He wouldn't." "I hope you're right. But Mom, people do terrible things when money's involved. That house is worth what now? $2 million? More?" $2.3 million, I said quietly. The last assessment valued it at $2.3 million. The silence on the other end of the phone spoke volumes. "I'm calling David tomorrow," I said. "I'm going to tell him what I found, and I'm going to watch his reaction. Then I'll know." After we hung up, I sat in the darkening room, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and pink. This house had appreciated in value far beyond what Thomas and I could have imagined. What we bought for $180,000 was now worth millions, simply because of location and time. Laguna Beach had become one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. I thought about Jennifer, about the times she'd commented on how beautiful the house was, how lucky I was to live here. I'd always taken it as a compliment. Now those comments felt different, darker, like she'd been calculating something all along. Tomorrow I would call my son. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, I just sat and watched the ocean, wondering how I'd missed the signs. I didn't sleep that night. By the time the sun rose over the Pacific, I'd rehearsed the conversation with David 100 times in my head. At 8 o'clock, I called him. "Mom, good morning. I was just thinking about you. The kids want to know when you're coming up for a visit." His voice was warm, normal, unsuspecting. That made it harder. "David, I need to talk to you about something serious. Can you come to the house today alone?" The tone shifted immediately. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it health?" "I'm fine physically. But no, everything is not okay. I need you to come down here. Today. Don't bring Jennifer." There was a long pause. "Mom, what's this about?" "I'll tell you when you get here. Can you come?" "I'm leaving now." He arrived 2 hours later. I watched from the window as he parked and walked up the path, his face creased with worry. When I opened the door, he hugged me immediately. "You scared me. What's going on?" I led him to the dining room table where all the documents were still spread out. "When did you last check on your property taxes?" he asked, scanning the papers. "Sit down, David." He sat. I placed the fraudulent grant deed in front of him. "Read this. Tell me what you see." I watched his eyes move across the document, saw the exact moment comprehension hit. His face went pale. This says you transferred the house to Jennifer last July." "Do you remember me doing that?" No, of course not. You would have told me if you were—" He stopped, looked up at me. "Mom, what is this?" "I never signed that document, David. Look at the signature. That's not my handwriting. Someone forged it." He grabbed the deed, held it closer, stared at the signature line. I watched him. Watched every micro-expression, every reaction. This was my son. I'd know if he was lying. "This doesn't make sense," he said. His hands were shaking now. "Jennifer wouldn't—" "No, there has to be an explanation." "What explanation? I never signed this deed. I never appeared before that notary. I found out because my tax bills stopped coming. The county recorder's office confirmed it. As far as they're concerned, Jennifer owns this house now." David stood up abruptly, paced to the window. "Jennifer works with these documents every day. She would know this is fraud. She would know the consequences. Why would she risk everything?" "You tell me, has she said anything? Have you been having financial problems?" "No, we're fine. We have some credit card debt, but nothing crazy. The kids' school is expensive and we're saving for a bigger house eventually, but—" He turned back to me. "Mom, I swear to you I knew nothing about this." I believed him. The shock in his eyes was real. The betrayal was written all over his face. "David, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty." "Anything." "Have you noticed anything strange about Jennifer lately? Any unusual behavior?" He sank back into his chair, rubbed his face with both hands. "I need to think. I need to go home and I need to check some things." David left my house that afternoon looking like he'd aged 10 years. Before he drove away, he promised to search through Jennifer's home office to look for any documentation that might explain what was happening. I sat alone with my phone in my hand, staring at the contact information for the Laguna Beach Police Department. This was the moment. Once I made this call, there was no going back. This would become official, criminal. My daughter-in-law would potentially face charges. My grandchildren would be affected. My son's marriage would likely end. But someone had stolen my house. And I couldn't let that stand. I made the call. 2 detectives came to my home the next morning. Detective Sarah Brennan and Detective Marcus Liu, both from the Economic Crimes Division. I laid out everything: the missing tax bills, the forged deed, Jennifer's position at the title company, the timeline of events. Detective Brennan examined the grant deed carefully. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is very clearly fraud. The question is whether we can prove who committed it. You say your daughter-in-law works at a title company?" "Pacific Coast Title Company in Newport Beach. She's been there for 15 years. She's an escrow officer." "That gives her access to all the tools she'd need to commit this kind of fraud," Detective Liu said, making notes. "Blank documents, notary stamps, the knowledge of how to file deeds with the county. She'd know exactly how to make this look legitimate." "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll open an investigation. We'll need to interview the notary listed on this document." Detective Brennan pointed to Robert Caldwell's name. "And verify whether he actually notarized your signature. We'll examine the deed for forensic evidence, and we'll need to interview Jennifer. She doesn't know I've discovered this yet. My son only found out yesterday. Keep it that way if possible. The element of surprise can be valuable in these investigations." Before you go any further with this story, if you're finding this as shocking as I did, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like this need to be heard, and your support means everything. After the detectives left, I felt oddly calm. I'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. The truth was going to come out, whatever that truth was. David called that evening. His voice was tight, controlled. "I found documents in Jennifer's home office. Mom, there's a file folder labeled Laguna Property. It has copies of deeds, tax assessments, property value estimates. There's even a printout of real estate listings, comparable properties in your neighborhood that have sold recently." "She was planning this," I said, the words tasting bitter. "There's more. I found bank statements for an account I didn't know existed. It's in Jennifer's name only. There's been activity. She's been paying your property taxes since the transfer. That's why you stopped receiving the bills. She's been paying them directly." Of course. She'd needed to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. If the property went into tax default, it would trigger notifications. She'd needed to keep paying the taxes while she figured out her next move. What was the next move, David? What was she planning to do with my house? "I don't know, Mom, but I'm going to find out." The next piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. 3 days after filing the police report, I received a call from a woman named Patricia Yee. She identified herself as a senior investigator with the California Department of Insurance, Fraud Division. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you filed a report regarding a fraudulent property transfer?" "Yes, that's correct. I'm calling because Jennifer Mitchell's name has come up in another investigation we've been conducting. I can't share details, but I need to ask. Has your daughter-in-law ever discussed investment properties with you, or asked you to sign any documents related to real estate investments?" "No, never. Just the family gatherings, normal conversations." "I see. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to be frank with you. This case may be larger than you realize. Would you be willing to meet with me?" We met at a coffee shop in Newport Beach the following day. Patricia Yee was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who slid a folder across the table to me. "What I'm about to tell you is part of an ongoing investigation, so I need you to keep this confidential for now. Jennifer Mitchell is one of several escrow officers we've been investigating at Pacific Coast Title Company. We have evidence that suggests she's been involved in multiple fraudulent property transactions over the past 3 years." My mouth went dry. "Multiple?" "At least 4 that we can confirm. The scheme works like this. She identifies elderly clients who own valuable properties free and clear. She creates fraudulent grant deeds transferring the properties to herself or shell companies she controls. She uses her position at the title company to make everything look legitimate. Forged notarizations, fake identification documents, falsified recording information." Why hasn't she been caught before now? Because she's careful. She targets people who are isolated, who don't have family checking on them regularly, or who have cognitive issues that might make them unreliable witnesses. You were different, Mrs. Mitchell. You're sharp, Noticed when your tax bills stopped coming and you had the wherewithal to investigate. Most of her victims never knew what happened. What happens to those people? The other victims? Patricia's face darkened. In 2 cases. By the time families discovered the fraud, the properties had been sold to third parties. Those families lost their homes. They're still fighting legal battles to get compensation. In another case, the victim was placed in assisted living, and by the time her daughter discovered the missing property, Jennifer had already taken out a home equity line of credit against it for $400,000. I felt sick. This wasn't just about my house. This was a pattern, a practice scheme. Jennifer had done this before. She'd ruined other families, destroyed other lives. I need you to understand something, Patricia continued. Your case is different because you caught it early and you have resources to fight back, but this is going to be complicated. Jennifer has been covering her tracks. She has help. We believe at least one other person at the title company is involved, possibly the broker himself. This is organized fraud. So what do? You keep cooperating with the police investigation. You document everything, and you prepare yourself because this is going to get worse before it gets better. When people like Jennifer realize they've been caught, they don't go quietly. She was right. Things got worse. 2 weeks after my meeting with Patricia Yee, David came to my house looking haggard. He'd lost weight. His eyes were ringed with dark circles. I confronted Jennifer, he said without preamble. She denied everything at first, said there must be some mistake, that someone must have stolen her identity. She played the victim beautifully. Tears, shock, confusion. But Mom, I've been married to her for 12 years. I know when she's lying. What happened? I told her I found the documents in her office, the file about your property, the bank statements. I told her I knew about the other fraud cases. That's when everything changed. He sat down heavily, put his head in his hands. She got cold, like someone flipped a switch. The tears stopped. She looked at me and said, "Fine. Yes, I did it. And you know what? Your mother has been sitting on a fortune for 40 years while we're drowning in debt. She has no idea what it's like to struggle. That house should have been David's inheritance anyway. I just moved the timeline forward." My heart was pounding. She actually said that? Word for word. Then she said if I told anyone, if I cooperated with any investigation, she'd make sure I lost custody of Emma and Lucas. She said she'd tell the courts I knew all along, that I was complicit. She'd destroy me. David, I recorded it, Mom. The whole conversation. I had my phone recording in my pocket. I have her confession on tape. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of hope. The recording changed everything. David turned it over to Detective Brennan, who confirmed it was admissible evidence. Combined with the forensic analysis of the forged deed, which confirmed the signature was not mine and that the notary stamp was counterfeit, and Patricia Yee's investigation into the broader fraud scheme, the district attorney's office moved quickly. Jennifer was arrested on a Thursday morning at her office. The charges were extensive: forgery, grand theft, identity theft, fraudulent recording of documents, and conspiracy. Because she'd committed these crimes using her position at a title company, the charges were enhanced. She was looking at potential prison time ranging from 3 to 10 years. The arrest made local news. Title company employee arrested in multi-million-dollar real estate fraud scheme, the headline read. Our story was featured, though I declined to be interviewed. I wasn't interested in publicity. I just wanted my house back. But getting the property transferred back into my name wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. The fraudulent deed had been recorded with the county. Even though everyone now knew it was forged, the legal process to void it required a court order. I had to file a quiet title action, a lawsuit to establish my ownership and remove the cloud on the title caused by Jennifer's fraud. My attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Walsh, who specialized in real estate fraud, explained that this could take months. The good news is you have overwhelming evidence of fraud, Rebecca said. The bad news is that the legal system moves slowly, especially in property cases, and Jennifer is going to fight this. Why would she fight it? She confessed. Because she has nothing left to lose. Jennifer's defense strategy became clear at the preliminary hearing. She claimed I had verbally agreed to transfer the property to her, that she'd had my permission, and that any irregularities in the documentation were administrative oversights. She produced a letter, supposedly written by me, stating my intention to gift the property to her because David was my only son, and I wanted to ensure Jennifer and my grandchildren were taken care of. The letter was another forgery. My attorney proved it by comparing the paper stock, the printer metadata, and most damningly, the date. The letter was dated 6 months before Jennifer allegedly created the grant deed. If I'd really written such a letter, why would I have no memory of it? Why were there no copies in my files? Why had I never mentioned it to David or Michelle? The preliminary hearing judge wasn't swayed by Jennifer's story. He found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and denied her bail reduction request. Jennifer would remain in custody, but the legal battle over my property continued separately from the criminal case. In the quiet title action, I had to prove not just that the deed was forged, but that I was the rightful owner and that no one else had legitimate claims to the property. This is where it got complicated. During the 7 months that Jennifer had technically owned the property on paper, she'd attempted to take out a home equity line of credit. She'd approached a lender using the fraudulent deed as proof of ownership. The application hadn't been approved, the lender's due diligence process had flagged some inconsistencies, but the fact that she'd tried meant there was a recorded lien attempt against the property. Rebecca filed motions to expunge all documents related to Jennifer's fraudulent ownership. We provided the police reports, the forensic analysis, David's recording of Jennifer's confession, and testimony from the handwriting experts who'd examined the forged signature. The court hearing for the quiet title action was in June 2023, almost a year after Jennifer had first recorded the fraudulent deed. I sat in the courtroom with Michelle beside me, holding my hand. David sat on the other side of the courtroom. He'd filed for divorce. He had temporary custody of Emma and Lucas while Jennifer remained in custody. Jennifer's attorney argued that even if the deed was improperly executed, I had verbally agreed to the transfer and therefore had no right to reclaim the property. It was a desperate argument, one that contradicted Jennifer's own previous statements, but her attorney had to try something. The judge, a stern man in his 60s named Judge Harrison, listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, and then delivered his ruling. I find the evidence of fraud overwhelming and undeniable. Mrs. Jennifer Mitchell engaged in a calculated scheme to defraud Mrs. Carolyn Mitchell of her property through forged documents and identity theft. The grant deed recorded on July 15, 2022, is hereby declared null and void. The property located at 2178 Pacific Coast Highway, Laguna Beach, is confirmed to be the sole property of Mrs. Carolyn Mitchell. All fraudulent documents and associated liens are ordered expunged from the county records. He struck his gavel. I had my house back. Michelle squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I didn't care. I'd won. After months of fighting, of stress, of sleepless nights, and constant worry, I'd won. The criminal trial came 3 months later. By then, Patricia Yee's investigation had uncovered the full extent of Jennifer's fraud operation. She hadn't worked alone. Her supervisor at Pacific Coast Title Company, a man named Richard Brenner, had been complicit in the scheme. He'd provided access to confidential client information, helped create false notarization records, and received kickbacks from Jennifer's fraudulent transactions. Together, they'd targeted 7 elderly property owners over 3 years. My case was the only one where the victim had discovered the fraud quickly enough to reverse it completely. In the other cases, properties had been sold, refinanced, or leveraged for loans. The victims had lost everything, one elderly man, and 84-year-old widower named Frank Martinson had died of a stroke 6 months after discovering his home of 50 years had been stolen. His children were still fighting to recover assets. The prosecution presented a damning case. They had the forged documents, the forensic evidence, David's recording of Jennifer's confession, testimony from the other victims, financial records showing Jennifer's spending sprees after committing the frauds, and evidence of communication between Jennifer and Richard coordinating their scheme. Jennifer's defense was weak. Her attorney tried to paint her as someone who'd made mistakes under financial pressure, someone who deserved leniency because she had children. But the jury saw through it. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. This was systematic, calculated fraud against vulnerable people. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I testified about discovering the missing tax bills, about finding the forged deed, about the betrayal of trust. I kept my testimony factual and unemotional. The evidence spoke for itself. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Jennifer's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The judge had considerable discretion in sentencing. Jennifer faced anywhere from 3 to 10 years in state prison. The victims' families were allowed to make impact statements. I spoke last. Your Honor, Jennifer Mitchell didn't just steal property from me. She stole security, peace of mind, and trust. She calculated that I was vulnerable enough to exploit, but not strong enough to fight back. She was wrong, but she destroyed her own family in the process. My son is divorced and traumatized. My grandchildren have lost their mother to prison. Every victim in this courtroom has suffered because of her greed. I paused, looked directly at Jennifer. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I don't say this with any pleasure, but she needs to be held accountable. Other elderly property owners need to know that fraud like this has serious consequences. Judge Harrison sentenced Jennifer to 8 years in state prison with a possibility of parole after serving 5. Richard Brenner received 10 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution to their victims, though none of us expected to see much money. They'd spent what they'd stolen. As Jennifer was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not joy, just profound sadness. Sadness for David, for Emma and Lucas, for all the lives she'd destroyed, including her own. But I also felt something else. Vindication. I'd fought back. I'd refused to be a victim. I'd proven that even at 72, I was strong enough to stand up for myself and seek justice. It's been 18 months since that courtroom day. I'm sitting in my living room now, looking out at the same ocean view that started this whole nightmare. The property title is clear. The fraudulent documents are expunged. This house is mine, legally and undeniably. David comes to visit every other weekend. He brings Emma and Lucas. We walk on the beach, build sandcastles, cook dinner together. He's in therapy, working through the betrayal and the guilt. Even though I've told him 1,000 times that none of this was his fault, the kids are resilient. They know their mother made bad choices, but they're surrounded by love and support. David's been doing well. He's dating someone new, taking things slow. Michelle flew down last month. We spent a week together, just the two of us, talking and healing. She helped me organize all the legal documents into clearly labeled boxes that now sit in my fireproof safe. Just in case. Because I've learned that you can't be too careful. The house itself feels different now. Not tainted, exactly, but changed. I had all the locks changed, even though it was probably unnecessary. I updated my estate planning documents with a new attorney, making sure everything is airtight and that both David and Michelle are co-executors. I've set up automatic notifications for any activity on my property records with the county. If anyone tries to file any documents related to this property, I'll know immediately. Pacific Coast Title Company lost its license. The company folded entirely after the scandal. At least a dozen other clients came forward reporting irregularities in their transactions, though not all of them rose to the level of criminal fraud. The whole organization was rotten from the inside. I still get the occasional call from reporters wanting to do stories about real estate fraud affecting seniors. I usually decline. This isn't about publicity for me. But I did work with Patricia to create a presentation for senior centers about protecting property rights and recognizing fraud. We've given that presentation a dozen times now. If my story can help even one person avoid what I went through, it's worth the discomfort of sharing it. My property tax bills come like clockwork now, twice a year. I open them immediately, check every detail, and pay them the same day. That simple act, paying my property taxes, has become almost ceremonial, a reminder that this is my house, mine. On quiet evenings like this one, I sometimes think about how close I came to losing everything. 8 months. That's how long it took me to notice something was wrong. If I'd been less organized, less aware, less willing to fight, I'd have lost this house. I'd have lost the place where I raised my children, where I spent 40 years with the man I loved, where I planned to live out my days, but I didn't lose it. I fought back, and I won. The ocean is turning purple and gold as the sun sets. Tomorrow, I'm having brunch with some friends from my book club. Next week, David and the kids are coming down for Emma's 11th birthday. Life goes on. Different than before, but still good. And this house, my beautiful beach house, is still mine. That's all that matters.